Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual briefing on the California Forest Conservation Plan. I'm Megan Snow, the Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Sacramento Fish and Wildlife Office. I'd like to kick things off by letting everyone know that this presentation is being recorded. Our goal is to have this presentation available on our webpage before the end of the week, so you can come back and watch it again or share it with colleagues. To minimize any potential disruptions or background noise, muted everyone's microphones and turned off cameras. I expect this presentation to take the full hour, so we won't be having a Q&A session at the end. That said, we value your questions, so I've left the chat function open in this meeting so you can submit questions to us. We will use those questions in the chat, as well as questions we already received through the online form to update the frequently asked questions section of our webpage. I encourage you to visit our webpage frequently. We'll be adding lots of new information over the coming weeks. With that, I'd like to introduce Rachel Henry. Rachel is the Regional Conservation Coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Pacific Southwest region. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, Megan. Share my screen. Does that look okay?
That looks great.
All right. Good morning, all, and welcome. First of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to attend this briefing and learn more about the California Forest Conservation Plan. I do want to give everyone kind of fair warning that this is a lot of information. So as Megan mentioned, we are recording this, so you will be able to go back and reference the information I go over. I think we are all acutely aware of the wildfire crisis. We continue to see significant and alarming increase in the frequency, size, and intensity of wildfires, and the devastating effects that it has on our communities, on our infrastructure, and on our ecosystems. Recently, in 2020, the August complex fire occurred here in California, which was the largest fire on record and burned over 1 million acres and had huge impacts. The story that's more often told as part of news highlights are the effects that these kinds of fires can have on lives and on communities and infrastructure. And perhaps the more less told story, maybe to certain audiences, are the effects that these wildfires can have on ecosystems and the wildlife and plant species that depend on them. I do want to note, fire ecology plays a very important role in our ecosystems. Species have evolved with fire as a regular and really necessary part of the landscape. It's not the fire itself that is the problem, but really the rate in which they're occurring and the severity in which they burn at. These high severity fires wreak havoc on ecosystems, resulting in significant and long-lasting impacts. These fires burn hotter and they spread more quickly than low to moderate burning fires, often consuming entire plant communities, leaving little to no vegetation, which ultimately leads to a loss of biodiversity and really disrupts ecosystem processes. And when this occurs, particularly in forested areas, it can take decades or even centuries for these ecosystems to recover because they are slow growing. The intense heat from these fires can also damage soils, making them prone to erosion. Erosion can then lead to significant impacts to our water resources. We can also see a proliferation of invasive species after these high severity wildfires, which often outcompete native species in recovering landscape. So the list really goes on, and you can start to get an idea of the snowball of effect these fires can have on the landscape. And when you couple that with the compounding effects of climate change and drought and habitat loss, the results are an ecosystem that are really being pushed to their limit and unable to recover and are losing their resiliency to be able to withstand impacts. The images here show an ecosystem before the mosquito fire in the Tahoe National Forest and the aftermath of that same area. This area was once vibrant and full of life, which is a stark contrast to the decimated landscape shown on the right. This area was actually a site where biologists created wetlands with the hope of creating additional habitat for the California red-legged frog. So a lot of time, money, and effort went into this project. And biologists found that this area burned at a very high severity, and nearly every tree and shrub around the ponds, as you can see, was killed. The water in the ponds was of low quality due to the unstable soils that were left behind. I do want to add, frogs were found in this area, giving us hope for recovery of this particular landscape, but the effects of the fire were devastating nonetheless. Sorry, skipped. Here is another image of the creek fire in the Sierra Nevadas, showing just how barren these landscapes are after fires. So we see time and time again the devastating impacts of high severity wildfires and the effects that it can have on human health and safety, as well as critical infrastructure, making it really imperative that we work to expedite implementation of projects, those being fuel reduction and forest resiliency projects, that help to mitigate the risk of catastrophic wildfires. These projects often require some level of coordination with natural resource agencies, thereby adding to the procedural requirements to getting these critical projects implemented and on the ground. And if you apply that across the entire state, it becomes quickly apparent what a workload issue this can create, which in turn can create a delay in implementation. In response to the wildfire crisis, the Fish and Wildlife Service is developing the California Forest Conservation Plan, which is a statewide conservation plan covering the state of California as well as the Klamath Basin, that we are building as an innovative approach to streamlining compliance with the federal Endangered Species Act. We are building out this statewide approach by developing a series of subplans over smaller geographic areas. I will provide more information on those subplans a little later in the presentation. This plan is not adding new procedures for land managers to comply with, but providing a more efficient process to fulfill current processes and requirements. It's basically another tool in the toolbox for complying with Endangered Species Act that project proponents can use if they wish. It is totally voluntary. It does not replace our traditional way of doing business. Again, just another tool in the toolbox. The plan is only available to project proponents that are undertaking activities aimed at reducing fuel loads and increasing ecosystem resilience. I'll repeat that probably 5 more times because it's important. So the plan covers all lands, federal and non-federal, and provides a one-stop shop for all landowners to seek compliance with the Federal Endangered Species Act should they need it. Our overall goal of the plan are to help increase the pace and scale of implementation of fuel reduction work that will help protect our ecosystems and communities. We developed this plan in response to the growing need to address the wildfire crisis, and because of the expedited workload, or of the expected increase in workload, that would accompany that effort. And we're already really seeing an increase in the number of forest resiliency projects. So given that we anticipated implementation of a large number of projects, we wanted to work to not only expedite these projects, and also reduce the workload that comes along with them. Another goal of ours is to integrate these projects with conservation. So ensuring that these projects are appropriately implemented to account for species and sensitive ecosystems that overlap with these projects. When and where special consideration is needed for species or these ecosystems, we provide the measures or guidance or kind of a how-to adequately protect and manage for those resources while also completing the necessary treatments at hand. And another goal is to provide a clear and consistent approach to implementation of fuel reduction and forest resilience projects across all landscapes, regardless of ownership, federal or non-federal. Development of this concept has been and continues to be developed with partner input. When our region first identified a need to provide an efficient mechanism for compliance with these projects or for these projects, we spent time coordinating with our partners and potential future users of the plan to get input on basically whether folks thought this was a good idea. We didn't want to spend time developing a plan that either wasn't going to be accepted or that wasn't going to be useful to project proponents. Part of that initial outreach and coordination was with our tribal partners. Earlier this year, we hosted a webinar for our tribal partners to ensure that they are aware of this effort and to create an open door for participation and feedback on the plan. Understanding that tribes are not bound by the same requirements as federal and non-federal agencies that might be using this conservation plan, their engagement looks different, and we wanted to ensure that this plan complements efforts occurring on their lands and wanted to make sure it jived with those efforts and there weren't any red flags that we were unaware of. As we work to develop this plan, there will be additional opportunities to collaborate. And as we move into new areas and begin development of new subplans, more specific and local outreach will occur to landowners and agencies and tribes in those particular areas. The plan includes an inclusive and comprehensive suite of covered activities. Again, all of which must be with the intent of reducing fuel loads and increasing ecosystem resiliency. In this plan, we break this out into 5 general categories, those being hazardous fuel reduction, which includes mechanical and manual treatments, grazing, etc. Then we have prescribed fire, construction and maintenance of fuel breaks, post-disturbance tree and debris removal, and restoration. We have received a lot of questions as to who can use this plan, and I will talk more about that later in the presentation, but also what activities are covered. If they fall within those general categories, and for the 3rd time now, the purpose of the treatment is to reduce fuel loads, the project is eligible for coverage. These activities have been shown to be effective tools to protect the human environment and are necessary actions to conserve and protect our species. So how exactly do these activities support conservation? These activities are supported by a wide body of scientific research demonstrating their positive ecological effects. One of the biggest benefits from these activities, and this will likely come at no surprise, is how these actions mitigate the risk of high severity wildfire. The reduction of that threat in and of itself is hugely beneficial because it minimizes instances where we end up with landscapes that look more like moonscapes, like the examples I shared at the beginning of the presentation. These activities reduce the risk of wildfire by minimizing the buildup of dense fire-prone vegetation that can lead to high-severity wildfires. So these activities increase the resilience of the ecosystem, making them better able to recover after disturbances, thereby supporting species long-term. The covered activities also help to maintain vegetation cover that stabilizes soil and helps prevent erosion. As we saw in the picture, the high severity fire can completely remove all vegetation, leading to increased runoff, increased soil erosion, and sedimentation, and that sedimentation can enter waterways and degrade aquatic habitats. Fuel reduction creates more open forest conditions that can benefit species by restoring natural habitat structures. Thinning dense forests actually mimics the effects of historical low severity fires, which created a landscape with a patchy framework that supported diverse vegetation types. So it increases biodiversity and creates a more heterogeneous landscape. Working to restore natural fire regimes is crucial for maintaining ecosystem health. I mentioned earlier that species evolved with fire and they're adapted to survive, and fire often also plays a role in ecological processes such as nutrient cycling, vegetation diversity, and habitat maintenance. For many species that are currently listed on the Endangered Species Act or even proposed for listing, catastrophic or high severity wildfire is identified as a major threat that is resulting in the decline of these species. So mitigating the threat of these disturbances through implementation of fuel reduction projects is a vital species conservation tool. One of the hot topic species right now is the California spotted owl. In 2023, the service proposed to list the spotted owl. This is a species that inhabits mature forests, which take a very long time to grow and are highly threatened by wildfire. The species habitat assessment that the service developed was prepared. It identifies wildfire as a major threat to the species because it can destroy the species habitat, which again can take decades to grow back. We're seeing a reduction in the availability of suitable nesting and foraging habitats, and they're not recovering quickly enough to offset the loss that occurs from past fires, thereby resulting in a loss of habitat, which translates to a decline in the species status. Whereas low to moderate severity fires can actually benefit the owl by creating a mosaic of habitats that actually supports prey diversity and doesn't destroy mature forests that the species depends on. Another example of a species, this one which is currently listed under the Endangered Species Act, is the foothill yellow-legged frog. High severity wildfire is identified as a major threat to the survival of the species. Wildfire can drastically alter the quality of aquatic habitats by, again, removing vegetation, riparian vegetation in this instance, increasing water temperatures because there's less shading around aquatic habitats, and causing sedimentation. These effects can lead to declines in breeding success and affect the overall viability of the species. We do recognize that there are short-term effects, most of which are temporary in nature, that can result from the covered activities, and those can impact the species. Hence, us working on this conservation plan to provide a streamlined path to identify and minimize those potential effects. But when compared to the long-term benefit of reducing wildfire risk, enhancing habitat resilience, and supporting species recovery, the short-term impacts are manageable. This plan is designed to balance necessary management actions with conservation measures, ensuring the temporary effects are offset by long-term conservation outcomes. Given the long-term nature of this plan, we included both currently listed species as well as those that have the potential to become listed during the life of the plan. The way that we came up with a covered species list, and the same approach will be taken in all subplans as we start to develop them, is by applying a set of criteria. We first look at whether a particular species exists within the planning area and where these projects have been implemented in the past or will be implemented in the future. So do they fall within the range of the project or projects that could be implemented? We next look at the status of the species. Is it currently listed under the federal or California Endangered Species Act, or does it have the potential to be listed? Species that are considered likely to be listed are those that are proposed for listing or are candidates under the federal or California Endangered Species Act, or a species that has been identified as rare and are declining. When we look at whether the species is likely to be impacted by, we then look at whether the species is likely to be impacted by the covered activities. If there's no potential impact and the species can be avoided, there's no need for compliance with the Endangered Species Act. And lastly, do we have enough data on the species to cover them in the plan? We need to know enough about a species' life history, about their habitat requirements, and occurrence data to adequately evaluate impacts on a particular species, and to then be able to develop conservation measures to meet our regulatory standards. Overall, we tried to be inclusive as possible to provide the most use of the plan, but also limit the list to only what species would require compliance with the Endangered Species Act. For each of these subplans, the species will change, though we do expect some overlap in the plans. The plan benefits land managers by providing a preset, pre-developed framework that project proponents can voluntarily use to comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. We took the guessing game out of it and did a lot of the regulatory work for project proponents through development of the plan. As far as what measures and best management practices are needed to comply with our regulations, it's clearly laid out and explained in the plan. We took the guessing work out of the equation. And most of the effects analysis of that is required is already done by the service in the plan and the accompanying documents. Overall, this will reduce time for land managers to seek compliance, and time is money. And time spent on paperwork is also less time spent doing the actual work, implementing these projects which conserve our ecosystems. The measures that are included in the plan were written and crafted to ensure that we are meeting species needs and conserving species, but also supporting implementation of these important projects. We recognize the importance of these projects and want to support their implementation. There is a way to do that while supporting species needs, and the intersection of those two things is what we aim to hit in the plan. The benefit that comes from this plan will likely look very different to various parties. For federal users that manage a lot of land, such as the Forest Service or BLM, they can use this plan to request consultations for their projects and get coverage in an expedited manner. The same is true for non-federal proponents, though they will request coverage a slightly different way. We'll get into that, but they could fulfill ESA compliance in an expedited manner. Smaller private landowners may also need to get ESA coverage for covered species if they are doing the work themselves. Again, they would be able to get coverage in an expedited and simplified manner, or perhaps they are working with an RCS or a local RCD on a grant to conduct these activities. In that case, they might not be the ones requesting participation in the plan. Perhaps the RCD would, but they would be able to implement these projects more quickly because there's one less barrier, that being ESA compliance, to implementing these fuel reduction projects. Here is a simplified visual of the process for compliance with the Endangered Species Act, which is generally a three-step process that is broken into project design, project review, and documentation. The traditional process starts with development of a project design that for federal agencies is done in preparation of a biological assessment, or for non-federal agencies is done in preparation of a habitat conservation plan. That document is then provided to the service for coordination. We review those documents and typically undergo some type of negotiation or collaborative efforts to make sure both parties have what they need and that we're meeting regulations. And then it is sent back to the project proponents for them to formally submit to us. Then the documentation is provided from the Fish and Wildlife Service back to the project proponent with the final product of a biological opinion or a incidental take permit, and that's under Section 10 or Section 7 or Section 10 respectively. Under the streamlined process, now moving to the right column, most of step 1 is essentially done. Step 1 is the California Forest Conservation Plan. We do need some project-specific information that is provided in a project documentation form. And while it is not finalized just yet, we do have a few examples from our region, and those typically range from 3 to 9 pages in length. It will be a fillable PDF to ensure it's easy for folks to complete. And we also will require a eligibility determination form, which will also be a fillable PDF that the project proponents use to basically self-certify that the project in which they're requesting compliance for falls within the scope of the plan. That is submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Office. Those two documents are submitted to the Fish and Wildlife Office. If there are requested deviations from the plan or flexibilities that are needed by a particular project proponent, that review in step 2 might take a little longer than if a project proponent is following the plan kind of as is, but the step will be much faster because we aren't starting from square one. The project proponents will know kind of where the bar is from the get-go, and we can have discussions from there. Another thing I do want to highlight in step 2 is that this process does not remove all coordination with our agency. We're still here to help and coordinate with folks on their project. And the final product under the streamlined process is exactly the same. The main takeaway from this slide is the processes are generally the same, the product is the same, but the time it takes to get from step 1 to 3 is drastically reduced, which is typically anywhere from 1 to 3 years under the traditional process to as little as 2 to 4 months under this plan. As we have been requesting feedback, we have received some common questions as to what exactly the plan is. And in that exercise, it's also become clear that it's helpful to explain what the plan is not or what it does not do. All the plan is it provides a means to comply with the Federal Endangered Species Act. That's really it. There are 2 ways for project proponents to seek compliance with the Endangered Species Act, and those are under 2 sections of the Act. For federal agencies, that falls under Section 7 through a consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And for non-federal agencies or non-federal landowners, that falls under Section 10 of the Act. Those 2 processes are what we are providing a streamlined mechanism for under this plan. The conservation plan also supports conservation and recovery of the covered species. We worked to carefully tailor measures to ensure species are getting the protections they need while allowing for treatments of the landscape, which will reduce the threat of catastrophic wildfire, which is currently threatening the continued existence of many of our species. The plan provides a framework for compliance. There is still project-specific coordination that will be required, which we discussed on the last page, the last slide. We don't have the specifics of every single project, so we aren't able to provide for an automatic process. It does shorten the time to complete compliance, but there's still coordination that will need to occur. The plan is voluntary. Would like to do business the traditional way and develop project-specific documents, they can absolutely do that. This is simply a tool in the toolbox to provide efficiencies for existing processes. These are not new regulations. We are just providing a way to get Section 7 consultations or incidental take permits completed faster to support implementation of these projects. So now moving to what this plan is not. It is not a way to circumvent other processes or to cut corners. It is efficient, yes, but we are still fulfilling the same regulations, the same requirements for Endangered Species Act compliance. This plan does not provide any other necessary approvals for projects. Projects still have to comply with all other state, local, and federal laws. This does not give blanket approval to any project. And this plan does not actually approve the fuel reduction projects. That is not in the purview of the Fish and Wildlife Service. That is not our job, nor do we even have authority to do that. We are responsible for conserving and managing fish, wildlife, and plant species. This plan does not provide a process for prioritizing areas to be treated or what treatment types should be used. Again, that's not our job, nor is it our expertise. The plan is not a land management plan. The plan only provides a framework for compliance with the Endangered Species Act if and when that's necessary. As I mentioned, the plan is not required for use. It's a tool provided to project proponents who need or want and also comply with the plan. Somewhat related to this is how it intersects with existing consultations or processes that have been completed, or perhaps ones that are currently underway. Those will not be affected. Plans that are in place will remain in place, and projects that are currently under development can use that traditional process to completion. Project proponents, again, can still comply with the Endangered Species Act under the traditional way. And so you can kind of think of those projects, those existing and those currently underway, as fitting into that category. And lastly, this plan is not creating new regulations or processes. It's just providing an efficient way to fulfill existing processes. We are building out the statewide approach of this plan throughout California and the Klamath Basin by developing a series of subplans that will eventually cover the entire state in the Klamath Basin. While I would have loved to get this done in one fell swoop and create one plan, it would have been far too complex to be successful and would be crushed by its own weight. So we are taking smaller geographic areas and creating plans to cover those geographic areas. We anticipate that generally speaking, only the geographic areas and covered species will change by subplan. We want to provide consistency under this plan, so the covered activities and implementation of the plan will remain consistent. We are nearing completion of the Plumas Tahoe subplan and expect to have that available for public comment and review early in the new year. That plan is drafted and going through internal review right now. Next, we will be focusing on concurrently developing the Northern subplan and Sierra subplan. We're kind of ramping up our efforts from the development of one plan to two because we know what we're doing now. We're able to kind of use that Plumas Tahoe subplan as a template to help guide development of those next two plans. We are also starting discussions on planning areas for the remainder of the state. That hatched area are areas that will fall under future subplan areas. We just haven't got those lines drawn out and developed those planning areas just yet. We are also initiating development of a programmatic EIS that will cover the entire state along with the Klamath Basin and will provide NEPA compliance for all subplans. While the service is only required to complete NEPA on our issuance of incidental take permits, as that is a major federal action subject to NEPA, given the programmatic nature of this plan, we don't know where projects will occur and what issuance of our permit will facilitate. So in other words, we don't know exactly what the scope of our NEPA analysis would be on any particular project. So we're taking a conservative approach and assuming all non-federal projects would require a permit to proceed and analyzing the impacts of all covered activities on the human environment. That first subplan will be available for public review and comment early in the new year. And again, that is the Plumas Tahoe subplan that is shown in orange on the map. That plan covers approximately 3.2 million acres across Plumas, Butte, Sierra, Yuba, and Nevada counties, and covers the Plumas Tahoe National Forest as well as interdispersed lands within the planning area. I should also note that two of the priority landscape areas designated by the Forest Service fall within the planning area, those being the North Yuba and the Plumas Community Protection Area. The first plan covers 11 species, which include the California spotted owl, fisher, gray wolf, Lane's butterweed, white bark pine, the monarch butterfly, Sierra Nevada yellow-legged frog, northwestern pond turtle, foothill yellow-legged frog, Lahontan cutthroat trout, and the California red-legged frog. Our timeline for completion of the subplans and our NEPA document is generally shown here. In early 2025, the Plumas Tahoe subplan will be ready for public comment and review. In the spring, we plan to publish our notice of intent to prepare an EIS in the Federal Register and formally request information for the scoping of that document. We aim to complete development of the Northern California and Sierra subplans by next summer, and then finish off the remainder of the state, which I expect will take about a year. During that time, we will be working to develop our NEPA document and aim to finish that by spring of 2027 to comply with NEPA time regulations. This is a very broad, big picture timeline. We recognize that the wildfire crisis calls for action now, and we need to increase the pace and scale, and we will work to implement actions as part of our action of ESA compliance sooner, but we are limited by our regulations. Where we have flexibility or can do things quicker and turn on compliance sooner without waiting for completion of the NEPA document, we are looking into those solutions. One example is turning on federal compliance immediately because that process doesn't trigger the need for NEPA, so we don't have to wait for that to be completed. We're also looking at other ways to allow for the issuance of incidental take permits, so that would be compliance for non-federal projects prior to the EIS being done by completing other NEPA compliance earlier. More to come on that, but my main point here is that we recognize the need to rapidly implement projects, and we will work to find solutions to meet the needs, though we are limited by regulations in certain instances. So I think one question that folks might be wondering is when or where in this timeline can I actually start using the plan? And I will give the most unsatisfying answer, which is it depends. As I mentioned, for federal project proponents, they will be able to use the plan for coverage once we complete the accompanying Section 7 consultations for each of the subplans. I expect those will be completed within 6 months of a final draft subplan. For non-federal proponents, it's not as simple because we must complete NEPA, as I discussed. So if we're waiting on the final EIS for those projects, they would not be eligible for coverage until that NEPA process is complete. If we do smaller NEPA on particular projects or a particular suite of activities, those projects would be eligible sooner. Regardless, the first step is drafting and completing the subplan. So if you're interested in using a particular subplan, once we have a better idea of when that will be completed, feel free to reach out and we can discuss your particular project and how best to support you. The plan is available for use by any landowner or land manager who is implementing fuel reduction or forest resilience projects that either they need to comply with the Endangered Species Act, or they may want to comply with the Endangered Species Act and get coverage now because there's a species that is likely to be listed that could be impacted by a project. So it's not a need just yet, but it will be soon. Or for land managers that want to protect ecosystems and conserve species, this document can provide guidance on how to best integrate conservation into those activities. In order to participate, I think this might be number 5 or 6 of me saying this, but all project proponents, they're only eligible for coverage if they if the intent of the project is for fuel reduction or forest resiliency project. And that is an example of one of the eligibility criteria that will be answered in the eligibility determination form. I know I've said that a few times, but I think it's an important point that I want to get across as to who can use this plan, or maybe specifically for what types of projects are eligible for coverage. The process to participate in the plan also differs for federal and non-federal project proponents, and that's based on regulations. So both project proponents must submit the eligibility determination form, again, which is a self-certification checklist, indicating that the project fits within the scope of the plan, as well as a project documentation form, which we discussed, which provides us with the specifics of the project. We still need to review each project. We need to know the species in which coverage is being requested for, to track impacts and things like that. We need to know the who, the what, the where, et cetera, to track these projects and impacts, and also to be able to approve coverage under the plan. And that information is provided in the project documentation form. That form will be, again, a fillable PDF that will be very approachable to all land managers. Non-federal applicants must also submit an application for an incidental take permit, along with the permit fee, which is $100. And the last requirement for participation is adhering to reporting and monitoring requirements, which is standard practice. I hope this answered a lot of questions and provided some insights into what the plan is, and maybe also what the plan isn't, and why the service developed or is developing this plan. As I mentioned, the first subplan will be available for public comment and review in early 2025. Even if you do not live or work or manage lands within the planning area of the first subplan, I do encourage you to read and comment on the first plan. The remaining subplans will have the same look and feel as the plan. So it's not only a good way to know what to expect in the other subplans, but if there are changes that the service needs to consider, it would be great for us to know what those are now. I did try to incorporate many of the FAQs we received from you all, but if you feel as though something wasn't adequately answered, or perhaps you have a whole new set of questions, please feel free to send those, put them in the chat, and we will work to answer them in the FAQ we are putting together. Or please feel free to reach out to me with any other questions. My contact information is here on the slide. If you have comments on the subplan when that is released, please formally submit those through the Federal Register when we kick off that public comment process. Please do not email those to me. We want to make sure those formally get included in the record and are responded to accordingly. And if you would like to participate in the NEPA scoping process, we anticipate that to kick off in the spring. Again, we will provide updates on that as well. The website for the plan is listed here. We will keep that up to date, so please use that as a resource. Again, I know this was a lot of information, and hopefully you don't feel too overwhelmed, especially given it's not even 10 o'clock and we have a whole day to get through. This recording will be made available in the next couple days, or I think Megan mentioned by the end of the week. Please feel free to share and reference the link to that video that we will send out. And thank you all for your time this morning.